Today, we're going to look at Japanese prints, especially a type called Ukiyo-e. These prints give us a really interesting look at Japan's old culture, its art, and how people lived. This was from the Edo time, which was from the early 1600s to the late 1800s, and even today these prints are special. Ukiyo-e means pictures of the floating world, or floating world pictures. Originally a Buddhist term, this floating word came to represent a carefree attitude and enjoyment of the fleeting pleasures of city life. In other words, they show the beauty of life that doesn't last forever. They often show things like beautiful nature scenes, famous kabuki actors, and fun things to do in the city. How this art changed over time shows us not just what people thought was beautiful back then, but also how Japan was changing as a country. Ukiyo-e art started when Japan was mostly peaceful and doing well. This meant that merchants, or people who sold things, had more money and time for fun. In the Edo time, there were strict rules about who was important in society. But the townspeople, called chonin, became more important, and they really started to like art. Because of this change, art became very lively. Artists like Hokusai, Hiroshige, and Utamaro became very famous. Their pictures are not just beautiful, they're also like history books that show us how people lived, what they hoped for, and what they did for fun. The prints often showed scenes from the floating world. This was a name for the fun parts of town where there were tea houses, theatres, and other places for enjoyment. Therefore, early prints focused on the entertainments that could be found in the pleasure districts of Edo, renamed Tokyo in 1868, famous actors from the kabuki theatre, sumo champions, beautiful courtesans, or ladies from the tea houses. Ukiyo-e art was all about showing beauty that doesn't last and moments that pass by quickly. It reminds us that life is always changing. Making ukiyo-e prints was done in a very careful way. First, an artist would draw the original design on semi-transparent paper. Unlike in the West, artists played little part in the printing process. The project was coordinated by a publisher, who generally chose the subject and financed the work. Then, this drawing was put onto a block of wood. Cherry wood was the normal choice, as it was soft enough to carve, but durable enough to withstand many printings. Special workers, called block cutters, who were very good with their hands, would cut around the design, leaving the artist's lines in high relief. They made sure to get every little part right. The woodblock process was entirely manual. It was complex and labour-intensive. Paints were usually watercolours mixed with little rice paste. A sheet of paper was placed on top, an impression taken by rubbing the surface. If the picture had many colours, they needed a different woodblock for each colour. At this stage, the printer became involved, applying paint directly onto the wood. Using many blocks meant they could use lots of beautiful colours and make very detailed pictures, just like the artist imagined. There were both commercial and artistic incentives to keep the design as simple and uncluttered as possible. This helped create the simplified decorative style that Western artists found so appealing. The colours for these prints came from natural things like plants, vegetables and minerals. Extra colours could be mixed on the block. New pigments from aniline dyes became available from 1870s. These colours made the prints look deep and rich. They also used special tricks like bokashi, which is when colours fade into each other smoothly. Another trick was kento, which were special marks to line up the colours perfectly. These made the prints look even better. Making these prints was hard work. Once the paper had been sized, it was hung to dry. It shows how much care and skill went into each one. So ukiyo-e was not just art, but something made by many talented people working together. Japanese prints show many different things, and each thing often has a special meaning. Pictures of nature, like Hokusai's famous The Great Wave off Kanagawa, show how beautiful and strong nature is. The gigantic wave should be terrifying, but Hokusai transforms it into enchanting decoration. Beneath it, the spray resembles falling snow. It takes a moment to notice the 3 boats that are delivering fish to Edo. Tehir occupants lie flat, clinging on grimly as their vessels are tossed around on the swell. These pictures don't just show what a place looks like, they also show how people felt about nature and their connection to it. Pictures of kabuki actors in exciting poses show us what the popular plays were like back then. They showed famous scenes and characters that people loved. These prints were also like posters for the plays. They showed off how good the actors were and how exciting the stories were. The lack of detail in woodblock prints meant that faces were stylized rather than portraits. Utamaro was famous for his pictures of attractive women, but his prints also valued for their depiction of the latest fashions. Flat, linear stylizations were ideal for this purpose. Pictures of everyday things, like festivals, things people did in different seasons, and even quiet moments between people, show us the customs and traditions of the Edo time. Prints showing beautiful women known as bijin-ga celebrated how lovely women were. They showed what people thought was beautiful in a woman and also give us a peek into what women's lives were like then. Nature is very important in these Japanese prints. Actually, landscape was a relative latecomer as a subject, although it was landscape prints that were to prove most influential in the West. In part, the popularity of the theme was stimulated by the arrival of Prussian blue. A chemist discovered this pigment by accident in Germany in the early 18th century, but it only became widely available in Japan in 1820s. Earlier Japanese blues had either been unstable or faded quickly, but Prussian blue provided more reliable and effective way of portraying skies and water. Hokusai was certainly a devotee of the new pigment. He is probably most famous for his views of Mount Fuji, depicting it from every conceivable angle. Artists like Hiroshige, who made the famous series The 53 Stations of the Tokido, also used a lot of blue in his prints and was great at showing the changing seasons and how people lived with nature. These pictures don't just show how beautiful Japan's nature is, they also show ideas about living in peace with nature, which is very important in Japanese culture. The way artists show distance in these prints also helps tell a story. The special ways they arranged things in the picture make it look like you can see far into it, and like things are moving. It pulls you into the picture. This new way of showing distance makes the art more interesting to look at, and also makes you think about what it means. People can connect with the art in many different ways. Ukiyo-e had a very big effect on art all over the world. It's hard to say just how big. When artists in Europe and America saw these Japanese prints in the late 1800s, it gave them new ideas for how to make art. This sharing of ideas helped start new kinds of art that were different from the old European ways. Today, Japanese prints are still loved by artists and people who collect art. Artists today often take the old ukiyo-e themes and mix them with new ways of making art and new ideas. Some artists like to put old and new things together. They might use computers or different kinds of materials, but they still show respect for the careful work of the old ukiyo-e makers. Keeping these prints safe, both as old treasures and as ideas for new art, helps keep the story of Japanese art alive and important. Museums and art galleries all over the world have ukiyo-e. This means new people can see and enjoy this special kind of art. There are also classes and programs that teach how these prints were made and their history. This helps people understand and like this art even more. The art of Japanese prints is a wonderful example of how creative and strong a culture can be. A culture that really cares about beauty and making things well. With their detailed pictures and interesting stories, they ask us to look at the beauty of life, nature, and how people show their feelings. Each print tells a story. It catches a moment in time that people can still connect with today, even after hundreds of years.